Heroic rise and not one without struggle. In the early days of her career, Janet often felt conscious of being the lone woman in a room filled with men, a feeling still shared by women on all rungs of the corporate ladder around the world and in India. Women occupy only 19% of corporate jobs, but the startup ecosystem gives off some hope. 35% of the Indian startup workforce is now female. That's as per ACT's Women in India Startup Ecosystem report. And with timely and targeted action, representation of women in startups can rise to 50% by 2030. While the motivation for women to work at startups is not very different from that of men, with both preferring to accelerated learning and advancement, the fast pace of work and innovation as key drivers, women also say they find it easier to break the proverbial glass ceiling at startups when compared to the corporate sector. Having said that, just 18% of Indian startups are led by women, and 17% of India's billion-dollar startups have a woman co-founder. In fact, the gender gap widens after the 10-year mark at startups. 8 out of 10 men occupy director-level positions or higher, compared to only 5 in 10 women. So are we doing enough to level the playing field, and what are the best practices India's startups need to adopt as they commit to gender parity? Hello and welcome to Young Turks, India's longest-running show on startups and entrepreneurship. I'm Shereen Bhan. Joining me are 3 women who are leading from the front in turning the ecosystem into an equal opportunity employer. With me, Suman Gopalan, Chair of the Advisory Council ACT for Women. Also with me, Supriya, the co-founder and CEO of Josh Stocks, and Aakanksha Gulati, Director at ACT Grants. Supriya, Suman and Aakanksha, many thanks for joining us here on Young Turks. Suman, I'm going to start by asking you about the progress that we have made, and the data clearly does indicate that. We've been speaking periodically since ACT was set up to try and catalyze this change as far as the Indian startup ecosystem is concerned and move towards greater gender parity. What do you believe has worked so far?
First of all, Shereen, thank you so much for having us. It's wonderful to be back on your show. And I know this is a topic that is so close to your heart. So great to be having this discussion. I think since the time we started ACT, right, one of the things we wanted to shine the light on is the participation of women in startups, because we firmly believe that startups, by nature of the kind of company they are, the kind of environment they have, and the fact that they're starting ground up, have a greater propensity for fostering inclusion and diversity as a part of their culture. And so it's much easier for women and for companies to actually foster diversity in startups. But as always, there is only so much that conventional wisdom takes us. So we wanted to start with data and really shine the light on, A, what is the status today? And 2, understand what are the drivers and what are the motivations. And WISER has been eye-opening in that sense. Yeah. And I know we're going to delve into that deeper. But definitely in terms of what women want or what are the biggest drivers, you'll find that it is so refreshing to see that it's not what conventional wisdom tells us, which is, flexibility, more leave, all of that. In fact, women want accelerated careers. They want equal role in decision-making. And startups are a wonderful place to make that happen, because they usually look for great talent and generally leave everything else by the wayside, whether it's tenure, experience, age, prior ability to do things, all of that. So startups, I think, are really breaking a lot of norms and helping really lay a different path for women to shine. And that's what we're very excited about.
Well, and that's the point that you make, that the data is indicating that something is working for the positive, for the better, as far as the Indian startup ecosystem is concerned. As Suman was pointing out, as per the data, 35% of total startup workforce in 2022 is represented by women. 17% of India's 100-plus unicorns are led by women. 18% of India's 90,000-plus startups are led by women. Of course, there's a long journey to cover, distance to go, but the data certainly seems to indicate that things are moving in a positive direction. Aakanksha, I want to come to you and understand what we just heard there from Suman. This business of the fact that startups actually provide an environment which is as equal opportunity as one can hope for, as one would like to be able to enjoy. And that seems to be propelling more women to opt for the startup ecosystem versus a regular corporate job. Now, in your experience, with the way that startups are operating, the measures in place today, how does this 35% become 50%? Which is the aspiration? Which is the target by 2030?
Yeah, no, great question. And I think I want to highlight both the truth and what the hope is, right? So the truth is that today's startups are at 35% women, which seems like a great starting point compared to the 19% that traditional enterprises and corporates are, right? So like Suman said, that's an advantage that we have. I think one word of caution there, though, is that was that really done intentionally? Was that a managed outcome, or was that an unmanaged outcome, right? And I think at this point, we have to kind of, in all fairness, say that, look, part of that could have also just happened by accident, right? Startups are new, younger organizations, looking out for talent, building new organizations from scratch. And so therefore, that's allowed, more younger people to come in. And typically, in the younger workforce, we see more women as well. And so that could have been an unmanaged outcome as well, right? So that's the current reality where we are, right? Having said that, startups are still mimicking some of the same trends that we've seen globally for decades across corporate, right? Which is that today in India, at entry levels, you'll see, 38% women in startups, 37% in corporate. So not very different. And then, things start changing. And by senior level, CXO, CEO level, we see 5% in corporate India versus 18% in startups, right? So startups are healthier, but what will it take, to your point, to get to, that larger North Star, which is equity? And I think this pattern, Shereen, is one that we have to be really, really careful of, which is that even though we're starting at a healthier mouth of the funnel, we do see the same trend where it's really advancement where women start, falling behind. And just 10 years into their career, even in startups, like you said, we see 8 out of 10 men have, made it to director positions or higher versus only 5 in 10 women. So one key critical thing that we really have to now double down on is how do we advance more women, right? And to Suman's point, this was counterintuitive because when we started work, we thought, there'll probably be a very methodical way of doing this. First, we fix entry. If we get 50-50 at entry, then we fix, how women retain mid-level, emerging, and senior. That's, by and large, we're finding that it's not going to be the key lever, right? If we really want to shift the equation, we almost have to go top down. And that's where some of the counter evidence is really, really pushing our thinking. Because while overall we're seeing, 35% women in startups, and that number starts again showing that pyramid structure. If you see women-led startups, so startups that are led by at least one female founder or more, you're seeing, almost 45% women overall. You're seeing 2 to 3 times more women in leadership positions, right? So that tells us that it's possible. And then when you start peeling the layers, some of the levers and enablers become more real. And again, the big highlight there has been that it's just not standalone initiatives or one-odd policy. That's the magic wand, right? It's actually really something magical that's happening at the DNA level, both in women-led startups as well as startups that have moved closer to equity. That's overall moving the needle for women. So I'll just pause there for now to answer your question.
That's an important point that you make, that while we're seeing, at least at the base of the pyramid, a much healthier foundation, but the same problem exists as we move higher up the pyramid, where the pipeline gets slimmer and slimmer, but it is different, or at least relatively different, when we talk about women-led startups. And Supriya, clearly, as Aakanksha and Suman were both pointing out, it helps to have a woman on top. So I want to understand from you, what is the percentage today of women at Josh Talks in senior positions, in leadership roles? Have you done something differently to encourage more women to elevate to leadership roles as a woman founder?
Perfect. So I think, even when I came across the report and read the data, I was pleasantly surprised. But genuinely attracted me was the stat around how the organizations that are led by women founders have more women represented. And it makes complete sense because even if you look at, how our aspirations are driven, we tend to emulate who our role models are. I was having a conversation with an IAS officer recently, and she said that when women wear a uniform, it changes the entire society. And you see that in the next batch, there are more women who want to give the UPSC exam. And similarly, if you see more women who are entrepreneurs, who are leading companies, there is this aspiration that gets struck even at an early age, and people do want to join that organization, especially young girls. But just like we're talking about corporates, even what is happening at Josh right now is if you look at the entry level, the ratio that we have currently is 56% female, and the remaining is men. Even at a mid-level manager or a senior manager level, the ratio is say 50-50. But when we go to senior leadership, we have about 3 women out of 8 total people who are say L1. And that happens because of how our life cycle sort of moves forward. And I've realized that it's this time period of 28 to 32 where there is huge sort of attrition that happens among women. And what we've been able to do to solve for that is just create a safe space for conversation. Sometimes it's not about flexibility, it's not about ownership, it's just about hearing the problems that people are going through and knowing that you have a manager or you have a leader who's willing to listen to you and create that safe space for you and actually help you grow. And that has been, it's sort of just like a club or a community where people just come together and, just talk about their stories. And that has had a more positive impact than any kind of structured program or mentorship program that, we've tried to run in the past.
No, I completely agree with you. It's not just creating a space or, offering a shoulder to be able to have an honest and authentic conversation, but it's also ensuring that you make women who have taken a break from their career on account of maternity, etc., feel valued, not let them feel like, you're done and your days are over. I think that's a significant change in approach and attitude as well. But Suman, I want to come back now and talk about the holistic approach that Aakanksha was also speaking of. That, by tinkering with one policy, by allowing flexible hours or making that just the sort of fulcrum of your policy may not necessarily be the answer. So what do you believe within the organizations that you have worked with the organizations that have been surveyed, what is working? What are the practices that are working in retention and ensuring that women can actually rise up to leadership levels?
Sure. First and foremost, I think more than practices, the one thing that has the greatest impact is actually the culture you create. This whole concept of inclusion and diversity has to be built into the fabric of your DNA, as Aakanksha said. And as part of WISER also, as we were researching some of the best companies, we found that the top 10 or 20% in terms of women's participation, those companies inherently had it as part of their practices. Right? It wasn't just one thing they did or two things they did. Of course, they all had different practices and policies in place. But even beyond that, fundamentally, there was a culture of inclusion. And predominantly what happens is when you have that, that pretty much drives everything that you do. Right? And that's really what helps in advancement of not just women, actually all forms of diversity. Whether you look at age, whether you look at any kind of diversity. So I think culture trumps any policy or practice any day when it comes to having the right kind of environment, diversity, all of that. The second thing I would say is, of course, we just talked about how important it is to have women in decision-making roles and across leadership. Otherwise, what happens, and what I have seen in companies I have worked for, and we just spoke about E&Y and they're getting a new woman CEO, is you have a single definition of success. A lot of times we put in place, criteria or judgment criteria for talent, which is not fundamentally based on any scientific way of looking at it or any research, but it's really based on successful people in your company and what do they do, and most often it's all men. So, which is why if you have more men and women in leadership, you find that your judgment criteria for success and progression is a lot more even. Then the bigger thing I would say, for every decision making, you need to have a more diverse group of people who do it, whether it is hiring, whether it's promotions, whether it is, fundamentally business decisions. And you'll find that your outcomes are a lot more inclusive that way. Just in general, it's not because of some policy or practice, right? It's just how the company operates. And so fundamentally, I'll say is, yes, policies and practices are very important, but even more important is leadership and culture. It has to be part of everyday decision making and way of working.
Yeah, it has to be part of everyday decision making. It is not going to be something that you can pick up annually come Women's Day, which is typically the kind of approach and attitude that most companies have. We need to move beyond symbolism and tokenism. But, Supriya, I want to pick up on another data point that the WISER report throws up, and that is funding for women-led startups has gone up from 11% in 2017 to 18% in 2022. Now, as an entrepreneur, as a founder yourself, what's the change that you've noticed in the way that investors look at women-led companies?
So I think that, the ecosystem has had a massive shift. One, in terms of even the number of female founders or, single founders who are also women and not co-founders. But second, I think there is, at least in the last 2 years, I haven't been into an investor meeting where there has been a gender lens attached to the conversation. And that's, an extremely positive sign, because in our early stages, and we've been an organization that's been up since 2015. So when we were raising our angel round, or we were raising our, first institutional round, I did see that come through even in conversations. But at this point of time, there is no gender lens attached to investing. And I've also seen that, in the market that we are in, I think women are great at finance. Women are great at managing resources and at maintaining highly profitable organizations. So I think there has been a bit of a wave which is more leading towards women and organizations that are sustainable, profitable, and a lot of them are led by women.
Yes, and that's good to hear that we've actually seen a significant change, and that's what the data throws up as well. But speaking of the road ahead and challenges, Aakanksha, and this is something that, again, we've been talking about, and that's what your report is highlighting as well, that while India actually leads many markets, many economies when we talk about female graduates in STEM at the tertiary level. In fact, we lead even the developed nations like the US, Germany, UK, and France, as per the World Bank report. But women's representation at startups in tech and R&D continues to be a disappointment. It's not translating into career opportunities and employment. What will it take to change that?
Yeah, fabulous question, Shereen. I think it goes back to what Suman said, right? So much of it is rooted in culture. And I think if you start peeling the layers there, a lot of it really comes down to the beliefs, the values, the cultural DNA of an organization, right? And I think one or two of the things that I hope this report does is that it busts some of those myths, right? So for example, if our belief is that women want more flexibility, and that's why they're falling off the workplace, which, by the way, truth be told, I mean, that was one of the hypotheses that we went into this work with. We thought, workplaces are probably not working for women because they need more flexibility, and startups are, go, and they can't provide that, and that's probably why women are not making it, right? But the truth is that the report has shown quite clearly that at least men and women joining startups are joining for the exact same reasons. And even when we peeled, the data there, we found, twice as many women said they had joined startups because they valued innovation. 40% of them said that was really important to them compared to 20% men. That's another bias, right? Typically, we feel, okay, it's men who are attracted to more tech and innovation type of jobs versus women. We feel that this report kind of that. We found that, 10 years in, 75% of women were saying that, shattering the glass ceiling, growth, ambition, these are very important things for me. So I think a lot of it comes down to Are we really listening to our women? Because if some of these biases are not corrected, then I think HRs, organizations, managers will continue to make decisions such as, women probably want more flexibility. Let's move them into roles that are non-P&L or non-business roles. You stop prioritizing hiring of women at senior positions, which actually is one of the biggest levers, like Suman said. To have women on top, it starts changing everything. It changes how you hire, it changes how JDs are structured, it changes who sits on the interview panel. You start hiring and promoting women very differently. So to answer your question, I think one of the big things that we hope happens is we correct some of these biases. And for all of these same reasons, women-led startups, because they have this DNA in them, they have the lived experience, they're more understanding, they understand when flexibility is needed, like Supriya said, creating the safe spaces, protecting women's share of voice in the organization. All of these things become really important. So our hope is that, a lot of the work will need to be internal work at the founder level often. And then, really kind of attacking the culture, the DNA, the values, the beliefs, with supporting, policies, practices, goal setting, we feel can be really important. Once founders and organizations are clear that this can really move the needle, not just in how they operate as an organization, but it has clear business repercussions. We get the best talent, we do better. But goal setting can really start moving the needle here on. Those are some of the recommendations that we're making as part of the report.
Right. And what you mentioned there, and I think that is something that all of us need to be mindful of, and certainly people sitting in HR positions need to be mindful of, that very often you think that you're putting a policy in place to help women, but it has the opposite impact, because you eventually end up putting them into even smaller and smaller boxes, as you pointed out. So we need to be conscious of the counter impact that well-intentioned policies sometimes end up having. But Suman, I want to come back to you. And so much of our conversation has still been around experienced as well as perceived biases. Through the course of the research work that you've done for this report, what are the top 3 biases that continue to exist when we talk about hiring women in the workplace?
It's the same everywhere, right? The biases, or kind of, what people consider as, conventional wisdom, is that women want flexibility. They're going to step off the career ladder because of life reasons. They're not going to be as aspirational as men are, or as dedicated as men are when it comes to a certain age bracket, right? So you'll find all of these kind of creeping in when it comes to making hiring decisions, promotion decisions, all of that. We oftentimes, my favorite one that I hear as an HR practitioner is, when you're promoting somebody, so-and-so is going to go on maternity leave. Why don't we wait to see if she comes back or when she comes back to promote her, right? So all these biases exist. But what I'm liking about the startup ecosystem is that they are busting a lot of these. And I'll tell you why. First and foremost, I think diversity is not just a nice to have thing. It's not just a women's issue that, we all sit together and discuss. It has to be a business decision. You said this, Shereen, India has some of the most educated women, including in STEM. And the fundamental thing all of us in startups talk about is this war for talent, not just in startups, across all corporates, right? We have such a huge demographic advantage. We have one of the best educated workforce, or rather, student force. Why are we not leveraging that? Or if we leveraged it, just imagine what we can unleash. And that is truly what I believe is the power that we need to unleash for India. It hurts me that when I see, participation of women so low in India, I think we deserve to do better. And that's why I think diversity, especially gender diversity, has to be a business reason, a business issue to solve for, because we all want great talent. And if you exclude 50% of the demographic, you're never going to be able to win that war on talent.
Yes. No, you're not just going to be able to win that war on talent. You're never going to be able to win that aspiration of being on a double-digit growth trajectory if women are not participating in the economy as they should. But Supriya, I'm going to end with you. We're celebrating Women Entrepreneurship Day, and as a woman entrepreneur, what is it that you would like to say, not just to other women who are looking at the possibility of entrepreneurship, or women who have already started their path and their journey with entrepreneurship, but also parents, partners who might be listening and who will need to come to the table to encourage and support women who want to become entrepreneurs?
So I think one of the things that I've seen over the last couple of years, Shereen, with women who are looking at starting up or are even looking at joining leadership positions in organizations, is that the biggest reason for failure for them is actually self-doubt. And that comes from not just what they're feeling about themselves, but what their family says, the expectations that they have to meet at home or with their partner. And I think there isn't a safe space to have that conversation, to just let it all out and to, come to terms with who you are and not question yourself again and again. Even with myself, I oftentimes, even if there is a small failure, I just completely spiral down and go back to this path of, am I the right person to have started this in the first place? And I never see my male counterparts doing that. So I think we just have to be a lot more confident in our own abilities, and we need to have a support system that encourages our confidence and doesn't slam us down at the littlest of things. And that will encourage more women to just keep at it. We spoke of Janet at EY. It's 33 years. 33 years of, I don't know what she would have gone through to become CEO today. So I think the support system matters the most, and we just need to create that environment. Yeah.
And I think, I completely agree with you. I think we need to have real conversations, honest conversations. At the start of my career, every woman CEO that I ever spoke to made it look like it was the easiest thing to have managed to get to that position, and it's not. And I completely agree with you on self-doubt as well, because I think each and every one of us do go through moments, periods of self-doubt. It's a subconscious thing. I don't know where we pick it up from, but we do. And I think it's okay to be able to have those conversations and acknowledge the fact that we deal with it, and I think it is imperative that we move down this path with all stakeholders, not just women. We need the men at the table as well. This cannot become a women's only issue. We need all participants, to be at the table to change the equation as far as gender parity is concerned. It has to be a managed change as well, as Aakanksha was pointing out. Supriya, Suman and Aakanksha, many thanks for joining us here on this special episode of Young Turks. So we wish you the very best of luck and look forward to hearing from you with better data, even more better data next time around. That's it then on this edition of Young Turks. We'll see you again next week. Till then, from all of us here, goodbye. Thanks for watching.